you have BRICS, which is a giant threat to U.S. hegemonic dominance in the U.S. dollar. You already had Putin at this event that said de-dollarization is happening, and there's nothing the West can do to stop it. So right now we have BRICS, and if you guys don't know, the GDP of BRICS countries is already larger than the G7. When you look at BRICS, this is an organization that makes up around 25% of the global economy. They have around 40% of the world population, 30% of the global trade. They have the biggest markets, and they have a vision of giving people an alternative in a way to escape and bypass U.S. sanctions. That is what this is eventually going to lead to. Now, when you look at what each leader says in BRICS, they have different messages, and I want people to understand that. They're not 100% uniform. You have Xi Jinping, and if you have Putin, they are aggressively fighting for breaking up the U.S. dollar, destroying U.S. hegemonic dominance. Lula, if I'm going to be critical of Lula, I would say Lula's been weak on that. Lula, he supported BRICS, but he supported BRICS, and when he talks about it, he even say, like, man, I'm not really trying to take on the G7. Once again, I think this is a criticism of Lula. He said, yeah, it's an option, it's an alternative of the G7 nations. And I'm gonna show you a clip of Lula been lobbying for Argentina to join BRICS, and he been calling out the IMF. And IMF and the financial crimes of the IMF is one of the biggest reasons why Lula wants to have an alternative to the Western systems. And the messaging you hear from Lula is a lot about sovereignty and giving people choices and options instead of bowing down to the U.S. regime. So what's very interesting is, despite you have the giant new bloc that's developing, that's a giant significant part of the global population, that now surpassed the G7 and GDP. And now you have even more nations that express desire to join BRICS, right? And now this is where you have Putin and Xi Jinping that's calling for rapid, and you have the leader of South Africa who's calling for rapid expansion of BRICS. You have Lula, who his message is, we got to make sure that we have countries that share our values. We got to make sure we have a coordinated effort. So Lula has been calling for a more tempered and more measured approach towards BRICS expansion. But he still wants BRICS to expand. He's been calling for Argentina to be one of the biggest, the newest people who join. So here are 23 nations that officially expressed desire to join BRICS. You got Algeria, Argentina, who expressed desire. I'm going to show you guys a clip here soon. Actually, I think I'll push that up next, because Lula at the G7 was speaking about that in the IMF. Bangladesh, Bahrain, Belarus, Bolivia, Venezuela, Vietnam, Honduras, Egypt, Indonesia, Iran, Cuba, Kazakhstan, Kuwait, Morocco, Nigeria, the United Arab Emirates, Palestine, Saudi Arabia, Senegal, Thailand, Ethiopia. And there have been debates among the BRICS nations regarding Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Venezuela. I saw Lula say something that was actually pretty disappointing, where he said he's very hesitant about having Saudi Arabia and Iran in the alliance. And I want to dig in and see what his logic is. But it was about having a unified message, having a unified goal. And he said he was worried about having Saudi Arabia influence in considering their values into the BRICS nation. And there are people who criticize Lula for that, because they say it should be about people who want an alternative to U.S. system, who want to take on the U.S. system. But Lula is more of a if he has very strict litmus tests that he's putting on the BRICS nation. This is what he talks about a lot. So with that said, we see a lot of countries that want to get involved, and Lula has been speaking out a lot about how we got to be very strict on who we let in. But here's him speaking on Argentina. I want to play this clip, and he calls out the crimes of the IMF. So I'm going to let this video play, and then I'm going to sum up kind of, just for the sake of time, what he's kind of saying, because he called out how IMF and the role that IMF played in bankrupting Argentina, how the IMF in the West don't give other countries an option other than harsh penalistic, exploitive financial systems, to say the least. So I'm gonna just play this quick video real quick so you guys can see.
44
you can see how passionate he is about getting Venezuela in the alliance.
Porque quando houve a crise em 2008 nos países ricos, o FMI não se manifestou. Até parecia que o FMI não existia. Agora, quando tem uma crise em qualquer país pequeno, seja da África ou da América Latina, o FMI resolve dar palpite, resolve falar, resolve meter o bico. Sabe, quando, na verdade, ele deveria ajudar. Deveria ajudar, mas não ajuda. O dinheiro que ele põe lá é quase como se fosse um cabresto. O país fica preso àquilo e não consegue sair. E a gente pode ver isso, a situação da Argentina. Como é que está difícil por causa do empréstimo que foi feito por interesses.
Because the loan was made for the political interest of the IMF. And he's talking about that now. But I'll let it continue.
Político do FMI, os 44 bilhões emprestados ao Macri na época das eleições. Há quem diga na Argentina que esse dinheiro foi emprestado por conta das eleições para que o Macri pudesse ganhar as eleições. Ele não ganhou, o Alberto Fernandes ganhou e o Alberto ficou com a dívida e que agora tem que pagar. E nós sabemos da situação da Argentina. Teve uma seca muito forte, perderam 25% da sua agricultura. E eu, por exemplo, defendo que os nossos irmãos da Argentina possam participar dos BRICS. Eu defendo isso, vamos ver na reunião como é que fica, mas eu defendo, se vai ser agora, se vai ser daqui ao mês, 2 meses, tudo. Mas eu defendo que é muito importante.
But I argue that it is very important for Argentina to be in BRICS. Just highlight some few very important things you're saying.
Importante a Argentina estar nos BRICS, e até porque tem uma coisa muito importante, o Brasil não pode fazer política de desenvolvimento industrial sem lembrar que a Argentina é um país que tem que crescer junto com o Brasil. Nós temos que compartilhar as coisas que nós fazemos com a Argentina.
Os nossos empregos, né?
É isso que eu quero. Eu quero que a Argentina tenha poder de compra para comprar mais e tenha coisa para vender mais.
And there's a point where he mentions how you have an Argentinian president that take IMF loans and funds and they are backed up by the Western government, and then a new party would take over, and now they're stuck with IMF debt, and then all of a sudden they got to do the bidding of the IMF, a new government that didn't even sign up for this. You guys see how it's a way for the West to have a permanent stakeholder in the country, no matter what the people want, no matter what the government has. You can have a revolution, you can change the government, you can reject the ideology of the old government, but you stuck with the IMF loan though, and they will control your sovereignty. Feel free to interrupt me anytime, guys. There's a lot to cover, and I'm going to be covering this a lot in the next week. You guys know I love this shit. We got meetings going on with the BRICS. This BRICS summit is a few days. I'm just summing up some general themes. You had Xi Jinping that arrived earlier today. He was kind of late. Vladimir Putin, he's not attending. Well, actually, I think he did attend. I'm sorry.
And not in person, virtual. He's attending virtually, not in person.
Virtual because he had a arrest warrant on his arrest, so he gave a virtual address, which I'm gonna show here soon. When he's talking about the end of de-dollarization. Here's Lula. I got this one. I'm gonna show you guys one more thing. Lula says, "We were always treated as if we were the poor part of the planet, as if we didn't exist." Adding, suddenly, we are realizing that we can become important countries. Brazil GDP this year will reach over $2 trillion and has become the 10th largest economy in the world by GDP, with a tendency for great growth in the future. The Brazilians are waking up. Now, once again, I have criticism. I think Lula should be more in lockstep with the strategy and mindset of Xi Jinping. His messaging has been all about sovereignty and options for countries. Meanwhile, Xi Jinping Putin like, hey, we got to dollarize. I'm gonna show you guys Putin. We got weaken U.S. headquarters. Lula, to be clear, is not necessarily saying that. He is saying something good where he wants people not. He criticized the IMF. He criticized the West and how they handle these countries. But he's more like, we need to have more solidarity amongst each other. Have Latin American currencies. Have trade amongst each other. So that's his argument. Anything you guys want to chime in real quick before I move on? We're not going to be too much longer of a segment. I'm just trying to summarize generally what's going on. But anything you guys want to chime in, going once, going twice before I move on?
No, go ahead. Oh, go ahead, JP.
Yeah, I saw this tweet. If I can share it really quick.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
This is interesting, and I saw this. I was just like, "Well, this is true." Goes in line with what you're talking about. Shout out to Rev Lascar.
Yeah, that's
BRICS
great.
didn't destroy Iraq; the U.S. and NATO did. BRICS didn't destroy Afghanistan; the U.S. and NATO did. BRICS didn't destroy Yugoslavia; the U.S. and NATO did. BRICS didn't destroy Libya; the U.S. and NATO did. BRICS didn't destroy Syria; the U.S. and NATO did. BRICS is not the problem. And that basically just sums up for what anybody is talking about BRICS as a problem. They didn't destroy the world. The U.S. and NATO did.
Yep. That's why they're not buying.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. That's why they're not buying the bullshit from the West anymore. And I'm gonna cover this later this week. How you have Algeria that called out France and the West for plotting to use their airspace to launch attacks on Niger. And now the French government is denying this, but they called out the West and they're demanding them to leave Niger alone. You see more African countries doing this because they are tired of, and they know who the bad guys are, the West. And just like BRICS, you got people who are standing up against them as well. So I'm going to show you guys this. This is the South African president. We won't play too much of this. We have all the big players that are giving their speeches.
20 countries from around the world have formally applied to join BRICS, and several others have expressed an interest in becoming part of the BRICS family. South Africa supports the expansion of the membership of BRICS. The value of BRICS extends beyond the interests of its current members.
Seldom have we seen Cyril Ramaphosa really espousing his foreign policy chops, going on to outline why South Africa has taken the stance that it has, particularly when it comes to the conflict in Ukraine, why South Africa views the BRICS grouping as a very important club and a channel and an instrument for the future of how the world will look, but also how Africa as a whole fits into the bigger picture. The president went on to highlight the fact that Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, will be on his fourth state visit here, and they are expecting to announce major deals that will be signed with the country's biggest trade partner. But of course, China is the biggest trading partner on the continent as a whole.
And now I'm going to show you this here. I got a few clips I'm trying to go through here in a decent amount of time. This is Putin, and once again, this is this is the language I want Lula to use more often. You know what I mean? And that's a criticism. I don't think it's a harsh criticism. I just think Lula is letting the West off the hook too much in the language that he's using. Look at what Putin is saying.
Предпринимаются усилия по отработке эффективных механизмов взаимодействия и валютно-финансового контроля. Набирает силу объективный.
And that's President Putin announcing the irreversible process of de-dollarization. And I think this is the last clip I want to get to. And I'm going to show you guys the code come from some Western media and how they're trying to spin this. And I already seen a few stories from Western media that don't align from what I've been following. I'm going to say it like that. Where they trying to say that BRICS is this uncoordinated, disorganized, divided thing because they wasn't forced to acknowledge it. Now they're acknowledging it, now they have to lie about it. So this last one we play here, China.
Should we pursue cooperation and integration or just succumb to division and confrontation? Should we work together to maintain peace and stability or just sleepwalk into the abyss of a new Cold War? Should we embrace prosperity, openness, and inclusiveness or allow hegemonic and bullying acts to throw us into depression? Should we deepen mutual trust for exchanges and mutual learning, or allow hubris and prejudice to blind conscience? The course of history will be shaped by the choices we make. An ancient
So I will be covering some more speeches and more development. The biggest thing to take away, and the biggest and the thing that they're focusing most on, is de-dollarization and addition of new countries into BRICS. And this show unity have the West in shambles because they wanted BRICS, India, South Africa, Brazil. They really relied on Lula. Like, they even have criticism of how Lula is toned generally. They expected Lula to be like, yeah, I condemn Putin for the Ukraine invasion. They thought he's going to be that guy. Which, once again, I think he should be harder on them. But he absolutely has not been the pawn that the West wanted. Because they wanted him to use him as an instrument to weaken BRICS. JB, CJ, was there anything you guys want to chime in? I just got two more quick receipts before I wrap up, but go ahead, guys.
I have a couple of receipts. I just don't want to overlap the ones you had because there was a couple of videos I was going to play that you
we can go to you so next.
Maybe
I'm going to show you guys.
Okay, yeah. And then go ahead, JB, if you were going to chime in, then I'll play my receipts here.
Well, it's just a question of really semantics, especially to you, Nick and CJ. Would you just say that Lula is just a bit softer in his rhetoric? And as far as this, it's like he's still in the right direction. It's just he's softening his rhetoric because
he
doesn't want to anger the West in that way. Is that
what Lula supporters, especially the ones I've talked to in Brazil, because you gotta understand, Brazil is the largest economy in South America, and Brazil always got to have some relationship with the United States. You know, and with the more Western friendly countries in South America as well, like Chile and other countries that are more neoliberal, they got to work with them. So Lula has learned to relax his language over the years in order to work with the United States. And that is the criticism he generally gets, which I think is fair and legit in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But he's working in a way, he's trying to see, how can I advocate for sovereignty? How can I criticize war? How can I advocate for peace while still being in the good graces to do business with these people? Because Bolsonaro was a straight up Western simp. Now, once again, I think this criticism of Lula being weak is legit, but there's people who got completely wrong on the other end, where they would say, well, Bolsonaro is the pick of Lula is weak. No, Bolsonaro is a giant Israeli simp, giant fan of Donald Trump and the neocon American agenda, sold out indigenous Brazilians and the Brazilian working class to American companies, implemented privatization and neoliberalism and austerity politics. So Bolsonaro and the Brazilian right are the Western puppets. People need to understand that. Lula is not where we need him to be because he's still acting as a statesman who has to deal with the West. But he's making people in the Biden administration in the West upset because he's calling out the war in Ukraine. He's advocating for peace. He's calling for sovereignty and relationships and trade between South American countries which is not what they wanted. Hopefully that kind of. I didn't want to take it. Hopefully that kind of answer what you're talking about, JB. Go ahead if you want to chime in, or CJ.
Yeah, I can just show you a couple of receipts. A lot of the ones you already played, I might end up playing one of the ones you were going to play anyway, but let's go to this one here. This one is from Li Jingling, and we've been trying to get her on the show, and she's agreed to come on, but because the time difference...
Oh, I saw this. I'm glad you played this.
Yeah, the time difference is
she agreed to come on?
Yeah, she's already agreed to come on. We just can't... The time difference is literally like they're asleep now, and when we're up, like she's trying to do like 9 o'clock at night, and it's hard for me to do 9 o'clock at night.
Yeah, I definitely gotta be on that show because she's
so
I've seen this clip too, so I can't wait to get into it.
Yeah, so let's play it. It's only a minute long, but let's listen to what the critique is or the analysis is here.
The more U.S. use the dollar as a weapon, the more the countries in the global South are realizing, guys, we need to do something about it. So there is discussions going on. And even in South America, little people know, but we already have a mechanism there. Not so used still, but we have a mechanism. It's Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay. We can do trade among these four countries without using the dollar. So this discussion is all around. And you know what? There's a funny thing about the currencies of the BRICS, because all of them start with R. It's renminbi from China, rubles from Russia, rupees from India, reais from Brazil, and rands from South Africa. So it's the 5 R.
Right.
Yeah.
I never thought about it. Yes.
Yeah, and it's the 5 R's against the 5 I's, which are the. This is
Bravo.
Great clip.
The more
Great
US
let me
use-
stop it right there. And then I got another clip. This one is from Vijay Prasad. I can play this one here. We're not gonna play all of it, but he does make us some great points here. And like we always say about Democracy Now!, the host is Amy is kind of sketchy, Amy Goodman, but the reason it's still a good show because they have great guests. Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, to that point, CJ, I was about to say that they have great guests. That's why Democracy Now! Is even more frustrating, right? Because it's like Amy Goodman don't retain information. Like they will have people on that will explain to her why like January 6th is bullshit, right? Like she will have a good guest on that will explain why this Trump nonsense is bullshit. Then she'll come on the next show and repeat the same liberal bullshit. You know what I mean? Like, so she had great guests, great conversations, but then she don't retain it on the next show. She'll start. Anyway, I'll let continue.
She goes right back to the ranked propaganda. All right, so let's listen to VJ. He talks a little bit. Like I said, we're not watching the whole thing, just a section of it.
Nobody is saying, and certainly the BRICS don't consider themselves to be an anti-imperialist platform. I mean, these are very large countries in the world. You put together their gross domestic product, the global share of the GDP of the BRICS country is greater than the global share of the GDP of the G7. These operate as large countries. These are not, this is not a socialist bloc or an anti-imperialist bloc standing against the West. Quite the contrary. This is a group of large southern countries that are basically saying that no longer do they believe that the West's interest is equivalent to their interest. They are putting forward their national, to some extent, their regional interests, to the fore. They don't any longer want to be, quote unquote, the veranda boys, a phrase used by a Ghanaian politician in the 1960s. They don't want to sit and do whatever the West tells them. They're driving their own agenda. I think it's a little absurd to judge them based on a socialistic standard. These are not, this is not a socialist bloc. Now, obviously, one has critiques of the operations of the BRICS states domestically. I mean, look at the Indian government. It has been savaging democracy. It has been going after the farmers and so on. But that doesn't mean that one doesn't have a dialectical understanding of the role of a country like India on the global stage. On the one hand, India is pursuing a full-scale capitalist project against its own people and so on. On the other hand, it is also turning around to the Western countries and saying, your issues are not our issues. I was very interested to see recently when some US congressman said, oh, maybe India should join NATO plus. The Indian foreign minister of a government of the right, Mr. Jaishankar, said in a television program, India is not interested in the NATO template. I thought that was an interesting statement. Let's take that statement seriously. How do we understand that statement? Well, the way to understand it, there's a kind of new mood that is visible in sections of the global South. In our institute, we are calling this the new non-alignment. When the non-alignment group was created in 1961 in Belgrade, all the countries that came to Belgrade weren't all countries with a socialist agenda. On the one side, you had Fidel Castro's Cuba, led by Dorticos, Prime Minister Dorticos at Belgrade. On the other side, you had very much pro-Western Ceylon, later Sri Lanka, at the meeting. So, this is a non-aligned emergence. This is not a socialist emergence. So I think that kind of criticism is literally tilting at windmills.
That is interesting to the way they're phrasing it. He's describing it a non-aligned alliance instead of a socialist alliance. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that, Nick. That it's a is that a good description, or that's something you would say you kind of
Yeah,
agree
it's not
with that
socialism,
this is a
yeah,
group
yeah.
coming together saying we don't think that our interest is not the U.S. interest, and this is about being non-aligned, not taking a side. What are your thoughts on that, Nick?
That goes back to the overall position that people like Lula have, right? Where he viewed BRICS as a great tool to expand the sovereignty and options of other countries, right? It's not necessarily driven on any sort of economic ideology. It's about sovereignty and independence from the West. Now you have Xi Jinping and Putin who have a very vested interest of expanding BRICS, and this is why China and Putin are advocates of the fast tracking route, while Lula is more interested in more of a we gotta make sure they align with our values. Gotta make sure we are very careful with expanding too fast. Meanwhile, Putin and Xi Jinping like, no, we need to meet people who are anti-West, who ready for de-dollarization as possible. So it is 100% accurate to say that these countries are in this alliance for a reason. Like India wasn't tricked by the West, who for a very long time trying to separate it with Russia and China, and that's where a lot of tensions rised up because they expected India to just straight up stop doing business with Russia, but they said no, this is not feasible. It's not feasible for us to go with you guys unhinged Russophobia. And there have been, don't get me wrong, there have been a lot of public officials, a lot of statesmen in India who condemned the Putin invasion, but they like, we still do it. We can't cut off Russia. Like, that's an absurd thing. And that's to his point that it's not necessarily in their interest to do that. They're not going to destroy their economy for that. And that's what their overall message has been. But hopefully that kind of answered it. But that's Dr. Vijay Prashad has a great analysis of the situation. And I think that was it's accurate to say as well. But JB, was there anything else you want to add?
Just a couple of headlines. We're not reading articles. I thought this was interesting because with BRICS, there's a lot of like, wow, this hasn't happened in a long time type of thing, or wow, this has never happened. And Saudi Arabia's foreign minister announces he's heading to South Africa.
Yeah, I remember I read something before with.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I read something before. I don't have the receipt with me yet. Maybe I can share with you guys another time. Where Lula is actually not in favor of Saudi Arabia joining.
Yes, I saw that too. I think I might have it. If I do, I'll bring it up. I think I might have it. Yeah. Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, but so it'd be interesting to see how that play out. And many of the leaders who spoke at the BRICS said they were open to hear people out, and they're gonna have this robust discourse, because that's what happened when you have these groups. Is you have discourse, you got to figure out what the direction of this. So I'm gonna actually share my screen because it's something I want to end it on as well. Ahead. I'm gonna show you guys how the media have been spinning this. Now there's a ton of stories you can find with a ton of misleading garbage about BRICS, where they're saying stuff like BRICS is unorganized, is not what people say it is. They'll bring up divisions, and that's kind of what they're trying to highlight. Because when I saw this BRICS thing going on, and I know my Twitter is extremely anti-imperialist, leftist, so they like rah BRICS. So you guys know I like to see what other people are saying. So I was looking at establishing sources and trying to see how they was reporting on the BRICS summit. So if you look at my Twitter, if you look at anti-imperialist leftists, we have we explain where each country is coming from, and we explain what the overall goal and mindset of BRICS. We explain some disagreements between the countries. But what I have seen is this from Western media, and I think it's cope, CJ, because I've seen disagreements, but and it's like the third story I've seen like this, where they say, well, this BRICS summit is emerging to deep divisions. There are deep divisions in BRICS. That's the narrative I've seen in the way. I've seen enough of these stories. I may put it together, a compilation, a tweet maybe. I may screenshot a few and made a tweet so I can find it easily. But this has been the narrative. BRICS divisions reemerge ahead of critical expansion debate. Now, I skimmed through this article. It's a long article. And this article is so much, there's so much bullshit here. I explained to you guys how Lula, he has like a different timetable, and Putin and Xi Jinping, they're more of a fast track. South Africa is all about expanding. You guys heard what their message is. They use the fact that a lot of these countries have different timetables and timelines and different theories on what country. They use that like, oh my God, BRICS is falling apart. They can't get along. They don't have a vision. Because they're not like NATO. NATO, we whip the countries. They all follow the will of the United States. If you question the United States, you're fucked. But unlike BRICS, they had debate. They had robust debate and they had conversations. So they're framing it, and I want you guys to keep an eye out for this. And I'm probably going to do another coverage on another segment on this as more stories like this come out. Because I'm already seeing Western media already propagandizing people about what's going on here. I'm going to show you guys another one. Like, this is them pushing the BRICS division. Look at this. China's awkward power play at the BRICS summit from the Washington Post. Another one I see. And this article is like, yeah, China, this is another example of China using their weight to bully countries and set agendas. And there's countries that are actually secretly upset at China because they're not. It's all this bullshit. and if you look at these articles as well, I'm summing them up for the sake of time. So I may do a longer segment on this because this is very interesting. I've seen a few of them say stuff like this. There are divisions amongst BRICS regarding the Ukraine war and how to treat Vladimir Putin. And once again, I'm saying I have not seen that. Have you guys seen that? And you have South Africa that said they're not going to arrest Putin. You have Brazil who criticized the ICC warrant on Putin. But I've seen the Washington Post and I've already seen a lot of liberal media they're trying to say there's a division over Ukraine, which once again, I think is a rank lie. And they want to program their liberal readers and viewers to think that. But anyway, that's just a few examples. They're trying to isolate China among BRICS and get BRICS countries trying to get China. That's why this narrative of China's awkward power play at BRICS summit. So anyway, I just thought that was interesting because I was trying to see what the West was saying about that. And those are just examples of what they're saying. They're just trying to, BRICS not a big deal. And if they are a big deal, they underorganized. Yeah, I know they got big GDP. I know they got big world population, but don't worry, it'll be good. I think it's cool.
Yeah. Let me share this headline here along the same lines, and then we can probably. Oh, let me close this advertise. Let me close this advertisement. BRICS expansion projected to reduce 90% of U.S. dollar oil sales settlements. That's 90%. So, wow. And I'll just read the first paragraph here.
What now?
This is something here. Let me read that. I'll read it again for you, JB. BRICS
no. I heard it. I was just saying, what now?
But I want to say it again for myself. BRICS expansion is projected to reduce 90% of U.S. dollar oil sales settlement. That's crazy. And I'll read what it means is this here. It says BRICS could shift the global power dynamics in their favor by controlling the majority of the world's oil and gas trade. The bloc is keen on expansion by allowing Saudi Arabia and UAE, or United Arab Emirates, into the group. The inclusion of Saudi Arabia and the UAE into BRICS could have a paradigm shift in the oil economy, as it could force other countries to drift away from the US dollar. Therefore, the first step of the de-dollarization process could begin with oil and gas sales.
Ooh,
just crazy.
And another theme of these BRICS. I wonder if I can find some new ones. I'm actually kind of curious because another theme you see with these articles is the pew-pewing of the BRICS threat, and I'm not sure why they do that. Maybe the same reason why they say Ukraine's going to beat Russia. To keep people delusional to the bubble burst. I don't know why he would do that.
That could be
but they do the same way, like, yeah, they keep talking about de-dollarization. It's not a big deal. Not a big deal. They overblown it. Why would you think that's not a big deal after what you just said? Here's some headlines. I was just curious. I was just looking at a few different time. I didn't see this one. How China's and Russia's clout is growing in Africa. So they in shambles there. That's them admitting the clout there. Vladimir Putin attends BRICS summit virtually to avoid war crimes arrest. Sorry, I was just looking at this out of curiosity, see what they because I'm going to be covering this throughout the course of this next week.
Yeah, it's a lot. Like we barely scratched the surface, even though it's a 30-minute segment or so. We barely.
So I'm actually surprised.
So much information, so many articles, Nick. I haven't even covered that because I discovered a new Twitter account, not new, but a Twitter account I'd never seen. That one I was just showing. Something Watchdog Guru, but they do nothing but BRICS just all BRICS. They don't report
Yeah,
on
that's my timeline for the most part.
Yeah, so it's a lot of stuff, a lot of headlines. I'm just like, wow, I didn't even know
so
that.
there's gonna be an ongoing coverage for us. So we're gonna get a lot. There's gonna be a lot to cover because this event is a few days. There's gonna be a lot to cover here.
This is what the U.S. is doing. They're doing that with BRICS. Man, they're doing the cross there. They got the bees, the prayer bees. They're just like, oh Lord, what's gonna happen?